Welcome back. It's Tuesday, time for our weekly feature, Eye on Africa. In Zimbabwe, President Emmerson Mnangagwa delivering his first State of the Nation address today. He's trying to consolidate his leadership as the country battles a cholera outbreak that began in Harare. But let's start in Ethiopia, that's reeling after a weekend of deadly, ethnically motivated violence. At least 23 people killed in the unrest targeting minorities in the ethnic Oromo heartland on the outskirts of Addis Ababa. The Oromo are Ethiopia's largest ethnic group, but they've long complained of being marginalised during decades of rule by other politicians from other ethnic groups. To discuss, we're joined by the acting Africa editor at Associated Press, Andrew Meldrum. It's great to have you with us,
Thank
Andrew.
you.
So the Oromo people here are targeting minorities. Why? Just put this in context.
Well, it's very difficult to understand easily, because this has happened at a time when there is a new prime minister, a new reformist prime minister who's young and who's making a lot of changes.
And who's Oromo himself.
And he was responding to, he was lifting the repression in Ethiopia. He has allowed groups that had been banned in Ethiopia to either return because they were in exile or to operate freely. He has released prisoners. There have been a lot of significant, and he's then lifted bettered relations between Eritrea and Ethiopia as well. So there have been a lot of significant reforms, but then now there is this ethnically motivated violence right on the outskirts of the capital. And it is because the Oromo people feel that they have been marginalized, and they feel that they're not making enough progress. And it really is a challenge for Abiy Ahmed, who's just 42. It's a challenge for him to see, can he maintain his reforms, or is he going to have to put down this violence and say, no, we have a state of emergency again?
Well, firstly, as an Oromo, has he condemned this strongly enough?
He condemned it, yes, and he, very strongly verbally. But people are saying they want to see, they want to return. Some Ethiopians are saying they want to return to the state of emergency because they want to end this violence right away. And there, surprisingly, there were big demonstrations in Addis yesterday where there were thousands of people on the streets, which they have not seen much of that recently. And it was put down by police, and 5 people were killed in those demonstrations. So it's really a very volatile situation.
So there's a sense of sadness. People are saying this comes, it seems like senseless violence when there is this attempt to open up sort of democracy in Ethiopia. So can you answer your own question? What does this mean for his reform agenda?
I think it's a big challenge. Remember, he only came to power in April. And so he's done a big reform agenda in the few months since then. But can he maintain that? I can't give a firm answer to that question. We have to watch and see.
So going forward, will you be watching to see sort of the level of put down from government, those sort of things being watched right now?
Yes, exactly. How much, how they will control that violence, but also the way Abiy has reacted in the past. He's going to, I believe, he's going to try and make more reforms that will satisfy the Oromo people and other ethnic groups. Ethiopia has 80 ethnic groups.
And he allowed this banned party, the Oromo Liberation Movement, I think it is. So what is their role going forward?
Well, again, what is their role, or what is Abiy going to do? Is he going to bring them in? Is he going to give them a meaningful role, either in government, or at least allow them to operate in a way as an opposition? And then, of course, will he and will they operate in a way that respects the rule of law?
All right, we're going to look at cholera in Zimbabwe, but first, another outbreak of Ebola in the DRC. How does the second outbreak compare to the first?
Well, at first it seemed like it was going to be much smaller. It's in far eastern Congo, which is far removed from the major cities, Kinshasa and others. However, in the past week or so, it has increased, so that now we have seen 55 deaths, which is almost equaling the first outbreak. But what's very interesting is now that vaccines are being used against anybody who may have come in contact with Ebola. And while just a few months ago there was the first vaccine, now we have 4 test vaccines that are being used. So there are 55 deaths. So far it hasn't exploded exponentially, but again, it's something that we have to watch very carefully.
This is incredible to me, because it seemed like scientists around the world sort of rallied together and came up with solutions after the first outbreak. So what are the learnings from the first one?
It is a learning curve, and it seems to be going rapidly. There were several different vaccines in use, but then how do you test a vaccine against you know, a deadly virus like Ebola? The thing that you can do, these are not scientific test, you know, ideal conditions, but on the other hand, they're the real conditions, and so you have to try and see what they can do.
And what sort of response will there be now? I don't know if you recall US President Donald Trump kind of saying, you know, workers who go and help out from America, good luck to them, basically.
Yes, he did. But look, the United States with the Centers for Disease Control and the United Nations and many other, you know, in the World Health Organization are all involved in trying to help control this, and also to learn how to better control any future outbreak, and eventually, of course, to try and prevent those outbreaks from happening at all. And
your assessment of the DRC government's response?
Well, they have welcomed the help internationally. They have not been obstructive at all. So that has encouraged. So the vaccines have been able to be brought in and distributed and put out very quickly. And the DRC is very effective at the tracking of tracking people who came in contact with those who have been identified. And so they have a good tracking system in place, and they're very effective at that. And all the international organizations have said the Congo officials have been very helpful and very effective.
All right, let's bring it a little bit closer to home. So Zimbabwean President Emmerson Mnangagwa delivering his first State of the Nation address. MDC officials walked out of that address today. Of course, he's always has a strong focus on the economy. Let's begin by listening to an excerpt from that State of the Nation address.
However, continue with the use of the multi-currency system up until the current negative economic fundamentals have been addressed to give credence to the introduction of the local currency. The economic fundamentals that need to be met are a sustainable fiscal position, foreign currency reserves of between 3 to 6 months of import cover, and sustainable consumer and business confidence. These economic fundamentals are yet to be made to justify the introduction of our own currency.
All right, so there, Andrew Meldrum again addressing the speculation, because a lot of concern about what currency will be used. There's been a dollar shortage, huge problems with currency in Zimbabwe.
Huge problems, and there's no, what Mnangagwa said was he's going to continue with the existing system, but the existing system is not working very well. And so he's really saying there's no easy answer, and I don't have an easy answer, and I'm going to try and find a solution, but it's a problem. There are not many countries in Africa that cannot sustain their own currency, and Zimbabwe is not sustaining it. It hasn't for years.
And surely many Zimbabweans want him to trash the bond notes that they see as a sham, basically.
Well, there's not confidence in the bond notes. They're decreasing in value. So if you're paying with for anything in bond notes, you pay at a premium. If you pay in U.S. dollar currency, then you get a good price. If you have to pay via electronic electronic funds transfer, then there's a different price. And then if you're paying in bond notes, that's an even higher price. So it's an interesting economic situation.
And the finance minister quite likes the rand, so we know the rand will remain in that mix.
Well, the rand, South Africa is Zimbabwe's largest trading partner, and so it makes sense for the rand to be an accepted currency. But will it be able to stabilize the situation? That's, again, we have a question that we can't easily answer.
Do you agree with me that he's an economically focused president? That's where he wants to make a difference? He's
business-oriented, and he would like to see Zimbabwe's economy improve. The currency is a major problem with that. So, yes, I do agree with you that he wants to make his mark on improving Zimbabwe's economy, but he's finding that it's not an easy fix.
Okay, so MDC lawmakers walked out. How effective was that as a protest?
Well, it's a bit of political theater, but remember, the MDC now has just 41 members of the Zimbabwean parliament. They used to have a much larger representation, but they can stage their opposition. But in terms of being effective, it didn't stop Mnangagwa from making his speech, and it won't either stop Mnangagwa from pressing forward with his legislative agenda. Another thing that Mnangagwa raised is that he wants to see his government take effective action against the cholera outbreak in Zimbabwe that's currently spreading through Harare.
Yeah, so let's look at his leadership on that. Let's first take a listen to an excerpt. Here is Mnangagwa addressing the cholera outbreak.
The government is indeed gravely perturbed by the current outbreak of waterborne diseases, such as cholera and typhoid, in some parts of our country. It is regrettable that this has resulted in the wanton loss of life. Let us, as a nation, commit to permanently eradicate these medieval diseases, mainly through addressing the challenges related to clean water and sanitation provision, as well as sustainable waste management practices. Going forward, government and local authorities will be seized with this issue. In this regard, the enforcement of the Public Health Act, which I recently assented to, shall be imperative.
So when you're trying to consolidate your rule, you need this like a hole in the head.
Well, yes, it's not something that he welcomes for sure, and it's very interesting that he addressed it head on in the State of the Nation address. It is a problem that he inherited because the water system in Harare and many other parts of Zimbabwe has been dilapidated and it's unsafe. And as a result, you only see cholera break out. And what's interesting, you see cholera break out in countries that are at war, the countries that have civil wars and big natural disasters. This is a country that's at peace. So it's really a condemnation of the public health standards in Zimbabwe.
So we're having a lot of infrastructure problems, but this, like you say, points to decades of mismanagement, something else you'll have to deal with along with currency issues, economic issues.
Yes. You definitely have to provide good, safe, clean water to the entire urban area of Harare, which means all the different township areas outside. And you may remember that in 2008 there was a cholera epidemic in Zimbabwe that really got out of control. There were more than 4,000 deaths in 2008.
Sure. So
they really want to make sure. Right now the death toll is at 33. And they want to contain it.
It's set to rise.
Well, it may rise, but we haven't seen exponential growth. So hopefully they can, and also there has been a quick response, by the government and by international organizations as well. Although some of the government's responses have been criticized.
Overall, so you're saying it was good leadership to address that head on. He's trying to consolidate his leadership. He thinks he's got a mandate after the elections. How do you think he did? Well,
in terms of a State of a Nation address, I think that was, well, let me put it this way. He appeared in the vintage Rolls Royce that previously had always, Robert Mugabe had always been in. He looked at the troops that were on cavalry and everything, and he appeared very presidential. He gave a speech and he talked about the major issues facing Zimbabwe, as you pointed out, the economy, the currency, the cholera outbreak. So, you know, that is what a president is expected to do.
Mm. All right, so we'll continue following developments in Zimbabwe, but let's look broader at something affecting basically the world and the African continent, the trade wars. So the latest salvo we covered, China hitting back. The response doesn't seem that huge this time around.
No, but it is still continuing. It's neither side is showing any signs of backing down. Neither side is saying, let's talk. Let's find a solution to this problem. And so it looks like it will carry on will carry on. Mm. And when that happens, it's upsetting the entire world trade order. And it affects China and the United States, but it affects many other countries as well, including countries in Africa. It affects, the value of currencies, which we have seen, particularly the volatile situation for the South African rand. To look at an old African proverb, when two elephants fight, it's the grass that gets trampled. And I think that it creates a very uncertain situation for the overall world trade.
And what does it mean for us, just trying to get out of an economic hole, for Zimbabwe trying to deal with all these economic issues, for other countries like Ethiopia trying to reform? Well,
that's it. And, Donald Trump has not, he's not welcoming world trade. He's trying to protect, and he's protecting his base in the United States by saying, I want to have U.S.-made products. So that may affect, eventually, it may also affect the exports that South Africa sends to the United States. It's not a major part of South Africa's trade, but it still is an important part. And it's something that I think that, South Africa had hoped it could boost into international trade, exports to the United States in order to boost South Africa's economic growth.
Especially cars, it's been one of our draw cards.
Well, yes, although I don't think that South Africa exports cars. Well, actually, no. There are some South African manufactured cars that are exported to the United States. So, yeah,
and
that could be a real problem.
We've wanted those global manufacturers to come here.
Yes, as an effective place to manufacture and then to export from on. Yes.
Access those markets. So,
yes.
Is it worth African leaders trying to stand together here? There's been a lot of criticism in the past. The Rwandan leader,
yes.
Kenya, maybe being a little bit subservient with the US president. But is a united stance possible and beneficial?
Well, you'd have to look at Donald Trump and think, what is the most effective way to deal with Donald Trump? And to appeal to him in a way that he will respond positively. And that, as you say, when you do that, the danger is that you look subservient. And what you want, what I think African leaders want to do, what the African Union wants to do, is to approach him and say, we would like to work with you, we want to be valued partners, and here's what we would like, but not look like you're in cap in hand. It's a diplomatic balance that has to be achieved.
Well, talking about cap in hand, maybe finally we can address South Africa accepting substantial economic help from China recently, and the ongoing debates around that.
Well, China has shown that it wants to be an important, or the primary economic power in South Africa and, across Africa. And it has been very active in economic activity, also in supporting big infrastructural developments, not here in South Africa so much, but in other parts of Africa. But there is still a danger. Many say, well, China wants to become the new imperialist power in Africa, and that it is allowing African countries to rack up large debt. that is unhealthy for them, but then they will be able to get China will be able to get resources from other African countries. So I think that China has offered a hand of economic friendship, and it has a long history of supporting liberation movements in Africa. However, again, one always has to look, what are we being given here, or is it a gift, or is it actually something that we have to pay for later?
So hopefully we can chat in future. Is China a friend or foe? Thank you very much for your insightful analysis. That was the acting Africa editor for Associated Press, Andrew Meldrum.